have faced from their oppressors. Regardless, whether it's the general public or the society or the governors of the time. Imam Hassan alayhi salam was no different. Certainly the challenges that he faced were different specifically to himself than the challenges of that of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Ma'soom before him, and Imam Hussein after him. Some of them fall under some general categories, and there are some that fall under very specific categories that are very unique and specific to him. One of the ways that this Imam was oppressed, not only during his lifetime, but afterwards, are the misconceptions that people have about him. And these misconceptions were designed as character assassinations for him. Many different misconceptions. I mean, we can sit here and talk for weeks and months about this Imam Salamullahi alayhi. But one of the misconceptions about him is that he was not a man of war. He always just wanted peace. He was not like his father or his brother. He was not someone who wanted to shed blood like his father and his brother. He was a better politician than his father because, he wanted to seek peace and wanted to calm down the fire that was within the ummah, and therefore he sought some ways and he did it. He was very successful at it. That's the political side of it. The personal side of it is the marriages that Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam was involved with. Specifically with the person who assassinated him, who killed him, Ju'da bint al-Ash'ath, Na'atullah. And people, even ones who consider themselves as the followers of the Imam alayhi salam, is like, well, if he's a Ma'soom, did he not know what this type of person is? And Al-Ash'ath bin Qais was very well known as one of the heads of the Khawarij at the time. And the marriage, we can sit here and talk about in the circumstance that it occurred with, but in my head I was waffling back and forth on what to cover tonight, because each one takes a bit of a time for each. His marriage and the circumstance that it happened, and why he married Ju'da, and the wisdom behind marrying her, and everything that was behind her. And if we have time, inshallah, at the end of the talk, we can probably cover the different narrations that talked about that marriage and how it happened. The one thing that I actually want to get into is the bigger, broader thing than the personal life of the Imam. In that the challenge that he faced immediately after his father was multifaceted, and it came at him from every direction, and he handled it beautifully. And the biggest thing that sticks out like a sore thumb in the seerah of the Imam is this treaty or this truce that he had with Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan. And people always ask, well, doesn't he want shahada, for example? Why didn't he fight? He had an army, why didn't he go forward? Why didn't he pursue something else? Yet, and that judgment is made on the Imam not only by Muslims in general, but some of his followers. So to focus on this point, we have to break it down as how the Imam sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or at least from what we can tell from history, is the three different enemies that he dealt with at the same time. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala. Immediately after the Shahada of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, there was an immediate allegiance that was given by the Imam to the Imam by Kufa, by Hijaz, by Yemen. Those are the main three regions that have given their allegiance to Amir al-Mu'mineen before him. Of course, there's one region left, and that was Sham. Imam al-Hassan picked up where Amir al-Mu'mineen left off. The last war that was fought, Naharawan, was a deterrent to Imam Ali alayhi salam, because his eventual aim was Dimashq. He was marching back the Khawarij deterred him from that in Nahrawan. And that took a toll. He was the first Khalifa to deal with 3 different civil wars. He ruled just 5 years. 5 years and 4 or 5 months, depending on the dates that you can go with. In 5 years, he dealt with 3 civil wars. He couldn't catch his breath. Amir al-Mu'mineen, I'm talking about. He actually started to put together an army to march after Ramadan towards Damascus. The assassination happened, and we already know what happened. Immediately after the assassination and the martyrdom, as I said, allegiance was given to the imam, but the imam had a stipulation for the people that came to give him allegiance. That you give me allegiance, but you wage war on who I wage war on. And you make peace based on who I make peace with. Your personal feelings, your tribal affiliation, your allegiances, your friendships, etc., etc., all of that has to go to the side, because that's something that Amir al-Mu'mineen dealt with. Do you agree? The people agree. Okay. Ala barakatillah. They put together an army. And many things happened. There were some betrayals in the army. There was bribes that were given by Muawiyah. His own cousin, Ubaydullah ibn Abbas, betrayed him and marched to Muawiyah with about between 4,000 and 6,000 soldiers. The Imam alayhi salam, as I said, he dealt with 3 different enemies at the same time. 2 within the Islamic borders and 1 on the outside. The first one being the enemy that is within his own ranks, within his own army. And those are about 4 different groups, 3 or 4 different groups. The second enemy is the one that is directly confronting him, that being Muawiyah and his people in Sham. And the one that is outside is directly linked to the second one, and that was the Byzantine Empire, the Roman Empire. It's amazing to me that the superpower, the second superpower, or maybe the top superpower in the world at that time, while Amir al-Mu'mineen and Muawiyah were fighting with each other, the Roman Emperor just kind of stood behind and watched. You would think if the Muslim nation is entangled in a civil war, all he has to do is step in, because both of them were exhausted from war. He could take Sham back. He could actually take Iraq and Hijaz. And the question that is not answered directly is why this person just stepped back. And is it believable that he just watched and not offered support? Whether it's logistical, whether it's capital, whatever it is you want to call it. It's really hard to believe that a superpower in the world just sits back and does nothing. History keeps repeating itself. We see things how they are right now in the world. I'll let the news speak for themselves. Whether it's in Africa, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's wherever you want to talk about. The Imam alayhi salam gave importance and gave priority to all of these enemies at the same time. But in order for us to recognize the oppression of the Imam, we have to define them and see how he dealt with each one of them and the challenges that he faced with each one of them. The first one, as we said, is that enemy within his own ranks. And that was within his own army. Many people make the mistake and have the misconception that the army of Amir al-Mu'mineen and the army of Imam al-Hasan was an army based on belief. It was based on aqidah. It's not. Firmly and historically and positively speaking, it is not. The army had different makeups to it, and it reflected the makeup of Kufa. The Imam alayhi salam had backup soldiers coming from Hijaz and from Yemen and everything, different tribes, but the main makeup was from Kufa. Kufa had many different makeups to it. Number one, you had the Umayyin, who had big time businesses in Kufa. Two, you had the Uthmaniyin, who were on the Uthmani side. They fell under the Umayyi umbrella, but they had their own political kind of stuff. They worked together with the Umayyin. Three, you had the Khawarij, especially after Siffin. The Khawarij are the ones who almost killed Amir al-Mu'mineen when he said, you need to keep going in Siffin, don't stop, regardless of what they do. And they said, they're raising the Quran on the spears. The famous words from Amir al-Mu'mineen, he said, هذا القرآن الصامت وأنا القرآن الناطق. This is the silent Quran, I'm the speaking Quran, and I'm giving you an order. That's the Khawarij. Four, you had the ones who are called the swayers, who sway one direction one way one day, they sway another direction the other day, and on. They're never decided. They were within those ranks. And the fifth group is never talked about. They were called the Red Regiment, Al-Katiba Al-Hamra. Not mentioned commonly. There's a beautiful book, it's called Sulh al-Hasan by Sheikh Radi al-Yasin, rahmatullah. Yes. Sulh al-Hasan, it outlines everything to the T during that political time. And he, Sheikh Radi, breaks down all of these different groups, and he goes into depth into their political background, their motives, and how they carried themselves throughout this whole time period. Katiba al-Hamra, they were Persian mercenaries that lived in Kufa, that were given and supported by the Muslim state immediately after Ma'arakat al-Yarmouk and Ma'arakat al-Qadisiyah. After those two battles, there was these about 20,000 families. They weren't just 20,000 individuals, there were 20,000 families. They didn't know what to do with them. So, what they were told them is that, where do you people want to go? This is, we want to stay here in Kufa. Okay, as long as you don't raise arms against us, here is an annual salary to each one of you. We'll call you when we need you. That was decades before that was established by one of the great companions at the time, as they say. Fast forward, Ziyad ibn Abi, Muawiyah's close companion, and he was his governor over Kufa way later. Historically speaking, he gave special importance to this Katiba al-Hamra. They had their own living quarters, their own neighborhood in Kufa, somewhere. As a matter of fact, at one point in time, there was a revolt within Kufa. He activated them, and they became his immediate police force, as they called it in the history books, meaning his SWAT team. They stepped in just like that. I'm sure you've seen movies and series about Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Kufa. There are some people running around wearing a red armor, something like that. That's Katiba al-Hamra. For Ubaydullah bin Ziyad, he activated them. And they were the spearhead in quelling the movement of Muslim bin Aqil, salamullah alayhi. That was Katiba al-Hamra. 20,000 of them. He left 5,000 of them in Kufa, and he sent 15,000 to Karbala. They joined the fight. That's Katiba al-Hamra. They were among the ranks of the army of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and later on, Imam al-Hasan, some of them. But their allegiance is to who? The one who was given them money. Bani Umayyah knew who they would take care of. Sallu ala Muhammad. Imam Hassan has a saying as he was marching towards Muawiyah, and he knew what he was dealing with. He knew who he was dealing with. It's gotten to a point when he used to lead the army in battle, he used to wear a full armor, top to bottom. And for good reason. People think that Muawiyah's assassination attempt against Imam al-Hassan was once, through his wife. No. There was at least 4 different assassination attempts against Imam al-Hassan, or 5, if you want to count the ones from Khawarij. One of them was from Hajjar ibn Abjar and Shibith ibn Rabi. Those names are very familiar, right? They were the top commanders in Karbala for Umar ibn Sa'd. They were in the army of Imam Hassan. And they hired some people, some assassins, that when he stands in prayer, you go through the bushes and hit him with arrows as he's praying, and no one is identified. What is amazing, the narrations say, is that the Imam was praying and about 2 or 3 arrows hit him in the chest. But to these people, it was amazing the Imam didn't fall. And he continued to pray. And he finished his prayer. And he took him out. And he gave a khutbah immediately after that. Talking about treachery and the people who are around him and everything like that. If it wasn't for that armor, he would have been killed right there. He had a saying that if I continue my march, some of these people, to be closer to Muawiyah, they would give him my head on a platter. Or to be even closer to him, they would hand him my body. I'm alive, but on the inside I would be dead. That I would be humiliated. They want my humiliation. And Muawiyah wants my humiliation. And people around the Imam asked him, like, why are they, well, they want to kill you, I understand, but you say humiliation, why? He said they still are recovering from the wounds of Badr. They're still recovering from the wounds of Badr. And Badr was decades before, way before. So they're still recovering. And when Yazid, when he had the head of the Imam in front of him, everybody knows. I mean, it's not his poetry, by the way. It was the poetry of a poet in Uhud that was recited as he stood over the Muslim shuhada. And Yazid was not alive during the time of Uhud. The question is, how did Yazid get that poem or that poetry to the point where he was saving it to the time of Imam Hussein? So that is the first enemy within the ranks of the Imam. 2, you had Muawiyah, Dahiyatul Arab, as they call him. Or some claim him as the better politician than Ali ibn Abi Talib, as some people would say. Which doesn't make any sense, because the Emir alayhi salam, he defined what Muawiyah was. He said he's a cheater and he's a liar. But he's not any smarter than I am. And I refuse to cheat and lie, because cheaters and liars will be resurrected with a flag on the day of judgment, and they will be pointed out on that flag. This is the flag of the cheater and the liar. And people will be scurrying away from them on the day of judgment. And I don't want to put myself in that position. So to those who say that Amir al-Mu'mineen was a lesser politician than Muawiyah, that's why he did not go forward like he did. At any rate, Muawiyah had deception on his side. Muawiyah was not the type of person who faced the Imams alayhim salam head to head. As a matter of fact, in Siffin, even before Siffin, if you take a look at Najj al-Balagha, and the letters between Amir al-Mu'mineen and Muawiyah, because Amir al-Mu'mineen was imploring him that enough is enough. Let's save the bloodshed. Just step down from your post. You don't want to give me allegiance, don't give me allegiance, but you need to step down from your post as governor of Sham. And they went back and forth, and he was arguing for the blood of Uthman, etc., etc. Then he declared war. Muawiyah declared war. The Imam told him, there's a letter from Amir al-Mu'mineen to to Muawiyah, they told him that the sword that was responsible for your father's, for your uncle's death and everyone that was involved in your family is still by my side and is still waiting to meet you. And I will be seeing you soon. Soon enough, Safin comes around and Amir al-Mu'minin steps forward. And he said, why are we putting hundreds of thousands in the way? You come fight me face to face, and whoever wins this thing can take it over. Amir al-Mu'minin is not arrogant, by the way. But he's the most confident man of his time. There's a difference between confidence and arrogance, brothers and sisters. Is that a mu'min is very confident in themselves and their abilities. But they don't cross that line into arrogance. There's a fine line between the two, where someone is so confident in themselves that they think that I may be better than others at this around me, or they start showing off to others that I am better. A mu'min doesn't do that. As I noted before, Amir al-Mu'minin was the most confident man of his time. Just like the Prophet was the most confident man of his time, that trait continued on. With Imam Hassan alayhi salam, he did not lose any confidence when it came to that. But he was confident enough to understand the setting that he was in. That with Muawiyah, as some of the leadership of Imam Hassan's army continued to fall off and be bought off by Muawiyah, that if I face him, there's a big chance that whoever that's left is going to betray me as well. And I would be left with only a few. And if I am, not only will I be executed, but all of Bani Hashim would be executed. And whoever that was the nucleus of the Shia leadership at that time that he was nurturing and bringing up, they would be executed as well. And it would be to the point where Muawiyah would say his people executed him, and Muawiyah would be crying over his tomb and his grave. Wa alaykum as-salam. Sallu ala Muhammad. So the Imam alayhi salam recognized this challenge. That Muawiyah can come out of this not only as the victor militarily, but he will rewrite history. And this religion would be completely flipped. Because he also recognized that the enemy behind the borders is not going to let this thing seep through, even with the martyrdom of the Imam. Now moving on to this enemy that we just mentioned. I've mentioned this name before, Sir John ibn Mansur. When Muawiyah was the governor of Sham, his top ministers, the majority of them, were Roman. The top one was Sir John. The writers of the minutes of Muawiyah's meetings when he had it with his generals and whatever, the writers wrote it in Greek and Latin. Question is, what? You speak Arabic, you speak Arabic. Why are you writing in Greek and Latin? The currency at that time was Roman. Amir al-Mu'minin started an Islamic currency in the year 40, a few months before his Shahada. And the first print right now, I want to say it's in Paris, France, a Muslim currency that's dated to the year 40 after Hijrah. And the origin of it was Basra. Amir al-Mu'minin started that. And he understood, he knew that currency matters. Okay, as we see right now. Nothing has changed, brothers. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. The dollar went up, the dollar went down. This went up, this went down. Currency matters. And Amir al-Mu'mineen took that bold step. And he said, enough is enough. We got to have our own. And he started his own currency. Yet the currency in Sham still had the cross and still had the Roman emperor's name engraved on it. Question as to why. That's a discussion for a different time. Imam Hassan alayhi salam recognized that this enemy behind those borders, if he continues with his quote peace with the governor of Sham, it's an open door policy for an intellectual warfare, which is what we face this current day and time. Intellectual warfare. Not just outside that the Muslim lands are being invaded intellectually, in the communities. Within the communities, this intellectual warfare happens. But if the Imam, and by the way, the suggestion for the truce from Muawiyah didn't come from the Imam. Muawiyah suggested it. And the suggestion was an empty piece of paper with Muawiyah's stamp at the bottom. And a letter saying, I'll sign on a blank check. Ask for whatever you want. And he made his demands that Muawiyah is supposed to stick by. Now some people that say the Imam gave up leadership can't say that. Cannot say that. We have to understand that the Imam alayhi salam temporarily stepped away from the executive branch of government, not the legislative. The legislative forever and ever stays with the Ma'soom, does not leave, because they do not separate. The source of legislation is this, and the Ma'soom is with it. As Rasulullah said, that my Ahlul-Beyt and the Quran, they will stick together until they come together on Kawthar. They would meet me in Kawthar, both of them. They do not separate. So, even in this current day and time, right now in this country, if the Supreme Court comes up with a law, or ratifies a law, or Congress says this law must be followed, does the president have to adhere or no? He has to adhere. And he's the highest person in the executive branch, not the legislative branch. He's under the law. He's not the law. The Ma'soom is the law. The Imam did not give up leadership. He temporarily backed away from the executive branch. Period. The end. That's it. So when we say that Imam al-Hassan stepped away from leadership and he backed off to give Muawiyah room to rule, that's an incorrect assessment. Absolutely incorrect. It was a strategic move. That this conflict between Muawiyah and the Imam is on hold. Now what conflict is going to come up between Muawiyah and the Emperor of Rome? He put Muawiyah in the forefront now against the Roman Empire, and it happened. War happened a few years later between the Romans and Muawiyah. There was back and forth. And then they established peace. And the amazing part is when they established peace, after they did the negotiations and everything back and forth, Sheikh Baqir Qarashi, rahmatullahi alayhi, in his book, he has 14 books about the biographies of the Ma'sumin. I highly encourage you, brothers and sisters, to read them. Highly encourage you. There's some secrets in there that you would not, that will just blow your mind. Just They would just blow your mind. In the epilogue, he mentions a letter sent from Muawiyah to the Emperor of Rome. In it, he says, I ask you for a specific type of poison that I want your scientists and your doctors to concoct and put together. So the reply came as to, you're asking for our services, what for? He said, I want to poison the son of the man who rose in Arabia against you. I want to poison the son of the man who rose in Arabia. In his letter he called it Tuhama. Tuhama is one of the names of the Arabian Peninsula. Against you. So the reply from the Roman emperor, because it's all from a record, is that we have no quorums with this person that you're mentioning. We don't want to start anything with him. The Emperor of Rome said, I don't want to start anything with Imam Hassan. So Muawiyah wrote back to him and says, his demise would be to your benefit, because the longer he stays alive, your throne is in danger. Sure enough, he sent him the poison, and that was the poison that was used against Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. And it wasn't the first time. Because the discussion and the dialogue between Imam al-Hussein and Imam al-Hassan, when they came up, when the noted historical scene is that the Imam was vomiting blood, or vomiting, as I say, he was vomiting his liver, which is basically a description that whatever poison he took was tearing him up from the inside. He was just vomiting his insides, everything that he was vomiting at. And he told the Imam is that I survived the poison of Muawiyah at least 2 or 3 times, but this one is different, and I won't be surviving it. Going back to what we were saying before, is that the Imam alayhi salam identified those 3 different types of enemies, and he had to take the steps that he did in order to preserve the religion as it was. Because he had to preserve a nucleus to carry on, because he knew what Imam Hussein is going to do. You see, the Imams, all of them act as one, but different roles. And as they face the challenges that they have in their time, they prep for the next Imam. They lay the groundwork for them. A lot of people think that Imam Hussein alayhi salam, with his shahada and everything that he did, it was over and done with. No, he laid groundwork for Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. And Imam al-Sajjad laid groundwork for Imam al-Baqir, who, by the way, during the time of Abdul Malik bin Marwan, in his time he led an effort that was called the Arabization of the government, which is interesting. Like, well, Arabization of government. I mean, why would he want to make government just pan-Arab? Because there were so many Romans in the government, he kicked all of them out, and he changed the currency. Historical books, the common historical books, say that Islamic currency changed during the time of Abdul Malik bin Marwan, but they don't recall the process of how it happened and the suggestions that came of what to print on the coins. And it didn't happen overnight. It took years in the making. And he consulted 2 people, and he took their advice. They were Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam and Imam al-Baqir. And there were letters back and forth between him, Abdul Malik, and those 2 Ma'sumin. What should I put on these coins? And they suggested it to him. And if you go back and you take the Muslim currency at that time, they were engineered by Imam al-Baqir, Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. That's where it was from. That's what history does not focus on. The Imams alayhi salam, they set up for the next Imam, and they take care of the community. They don't look at themselves personally and what is going to affect them personally. They have nukran al-dhat. They do not recognize themselves as a person or as an individual. They see themselves as the guardians of the religion, and they have to do whatever they have to do for the sake of the religion. They themselves, Imam al-Hasan, if you're telling me that Imam al-Hasan was afraid of death, I mean, Rasulullah said, "Ma minna illa masmumun wa maqtul." Does it? So they look forward to it. And the easiest way for him to get it was to march the battle towards Muawiyah, that's it. But there has to be a broader picture, a bigger picture approach. And that's what the Imam alayhi salam did. Part of that notion is that the Imam alayhi salam, in his marriages, now to go back to the marriage issue, some people might ask is, why did he marry Jarda, bint al-Ash'ath? Well, there's a lot of background to that. He didn't, the Imams alayhi salam, the Ma'soomeen, don't just get married to get married like we do. Because we want to have a family, we want to have children, we want to grow our family. It's one of those check boxes that we have to fulfill because mom and dad said so, because whatever. The Imams alayhi salam, when they get married, there's a goal behind the marriage. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his marriages after Khadija were simply for strategic purposes or to set an example or an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every one of them, top to bottom, every one of them. And if you're telling me that, he didn't know how to choose, that's a problem. That's a problem. That means the Ma'soom, his outlook is very limited. They knew, and they're not the first ones, by the way. The wives of Nuh, the wife of Lut, they're mentioned in the Quran, that they caused the Ma'soom issues. And I hope the sisters don't get mad. Fir'aun had a very pious wife. He caused her problems as well. But the marriage of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, the circumstance that it happened, there's a couple of different narrations that are mentioned by Ibn Asakir and Baladri, but I want to rely on the one that was mentioned in the book of Shaykh al-Qarashi, rahmatullahi alayhi, where he said that Amir al-Mu'mineen sought a wife for Imam al-Hassan. There was a man in Kufa named Abu Sa'id al-Hamadani. Imam wanted closeness to the tribe of Hamadan. So after prayer, he took Abu Sa'id al-Hamadani to the side and he asked him and said, "We want to be closer to your family. We want to give a proposal to your daughter, etc. For Imam al-Hassan." And Abu Sa'id was very excited. Al-Ash'ath bin Qais saw that the Imam was alone with Abu Sa'id al-Hamadani onto the side. Al-Ash'ath bin Qais, in order to know and identify this whole thing, we have to know who he is. Al-Ash'ath bin Qais had a title, the last king of Kinda, not Canada, Kinda. Kinda was a tribe. And it was one of the largest tribes in Hadramaut, in Yemen. And he was a notorious enemy of the Prophet. Until all of Yemen became Muslim, there was intense pressure on him to become Muslim, and he came in Am al-Wufud in the 9th year after Hijrah, where many different congregations from all over came to give allegiance to the Prophet and show their Islam. Al-Ash'ath bin Qais was one of them. He returns and he hears about the death of the Prophet. As soon as he hears about the death of the Prophet, he denies his Islam and he follows a lady by the name of Sujah. Sujah was a lady who claimed prophethood at that time in Yemen. And he became her mu'addin. When it was prayer time for them, he used to say adhan for them. Then the war started against, they called it Hurub al-Ridda. That's a whole different historical faction that deserves a discussion as well. In Hurub al-Ridda, Ash'ath bin Qais was made prisoner, and he was brought forth to the Khalifa at the time, and the Khalifa pardoned him. Not only that, a week later, he married him his sister. They became brothers-in-law now. I'm sure you've heard the name of Muhammad bin al-Ash'ath. Muhammad bin al-Ash'ath is the one who led the different armies or the different regiment against Muslim bin Aqil and then followed suit to Karbala. Well, he was a product of that marriage. Ash'ath bin Qais, historically speaking, he moved to Kufa after he was removed as governor of Azerbaijan by Emir al-Mu'mineen. He was made as the governor of Azerbaijan by the third Khalifa. Emir al-Mu'mineen came along and he removed him. When he removed him, he didn't go back to Yemen. He brought his whole entire tribe to Kufa and set forth in Kufa and settled in Kufa, along with many other tribes that he had truces with and different people. He brought thousands and tens of thousands with him. And he constantly badgered Emir al-Mu'mineen, challenged him consistently. That's who he was. That's just a nutshell of who he was. Going back to the meeting that took place that we just mentioned, Ash'ath went to Abu Sa'id. He said, I saw you guys talking alone. Is everything okay? He was just trying to say. He said, I have good news. He's proposing Imam al-Hasan for my daughter. So Ash'ath has a look on his face, a disappointed one. He said, I'm very concerned for your daughter. I said, why? This would be an honor. He said, yeah, but these are Bani Hashim. They're related to the Prophet, and I'm afraid that they have a lot of pride, that his son might tell your daughter, you know, I'm the grandson of the Prophet, and he's going to make her feel bad. Why would you want to put her through that? I have a better idea. Why don't you marry her to my son, Muhammad? And he did. While he was doing that, he went to Emir al-Mu'mineen. And he said, I saw you talking to Abu Sa'id. Khair, what's going on? He said, oh, there was just a proposition, you know, inshallah we want to seek marriage with them. He said, oh no. Didn't he tell you? I said, no. He said, didn't he tell you that his daughter is supposed to be married? His daughter is supposed to be married my son. We already talked about it. And Emir al-Mu'mineen said, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware. He said, well, I don't want this to be the end of this. Me and my friends want to come visit you later, and we want your son for my daughter, Judd. Can we come over to your house later? The narration says that when Ash'ath showed up, in Iraqi culture we called it Mashaya. He came, but he didn't came from just with a few people. He came with the heads of the tribes of Kufa, the majority of Kufa. And at that time, as I said, marriage was not established for the sake of just marriage, or two people getting together and having kids. It meant a political alliance. And the denial of the marriage means the denial of a political alliance. That was the practice at that time. So when Ash'ath came, he brought everybody with him, the major heads of Kufa. And the imam was sitting there, Emir al-Mu'mineen and Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein were all sitting there. And Ash'ath started talking. And he said, what happened today, and we want Imam al-Hassan to marry Ju'da, my daughter. Would you guys accept this marriage so it can unite all of us? So Emir al-Mu'mineen said, pointing to Imam al-Hassan, he's a grown man, he can make his own decisions. So Imam al-Hassan looked around the room. If he says no, this is a denial of a political alliance. And it would put his father in trouble. And there's an upcoming campaign of Siffin that he knew about. So he said yes. He accepted the marriage, knowing that Ash'ath was someone who caused his father so much trouble that hopefully after this marriage he would calm down. But history proved that he didn't. Abdurrahman ibn Muljam, alayhi la'anullah, the month before the assassination, that month he stayed in the house of Al-Ash'ath. That was his quarters, that was his Airbnb, so to speak. That's where he stayed. And that's what happened. Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam had such a broad outlook and such a vision, knowing that if he marched to battle against Muawiyah, that would be the end of the religion as we know it. But when you contrast with that with Imam Hussein alayhi salam, that if he did not march to war with Yazid, that would be the end of the religion. So each one makes the decision in accordance to the circumstance. And when they make that decision, there's wisdom behind it. There's divine, not only wisdom, because they have experience and they're smart. No, it's divine wisdom that they have, because they know what is best and what is to come up. And if it was not for the decisions of Imam Hassan, then the success of Karbala, we would see none of it. And this religion would be absolutely different, as we outlined before. Of course, the discussion about Imam Hassan alayhi salam can continue for many more hours. This was just a little snippet, I would say, a flash in the long reel that is the life of Imam Hassan alayhi salam and the different things about him. So, inshallah, due to the constriction of time, we'll stop here. And we can take a Q&A, maybe a few questions we can answer if there are. Salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. If there's no questions, that's okay as well. Now, Ahsanallah.
Thank you so much for the lecture.
Jazakum.
Very thorough and very. No, it's okay. Very thorough and very to the point, so to speak, straight to the and hopefully we could elaborate on that in the future lectures as well. And you beautifully touched on it today, the role of the Byzantine Empire. Because that is the internal CIA at that time that worked against the Islamic, government of Imam Ali alayhi salam, starting from Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa through the ruling of Imam Ali. I think the role of that Byzantine Empire was not recognized. So I hope all the speakers. It's a comment more than a question. I hope all the speakers can touch on that, like what you did beautifully today, and highlight how this is really important. Now, if you take it all in perspective, how Imam Ali did what he called in Arabic Sakr Umla, he established his own currency.
Yeah.
Now we see the importance of having their own currency and how important, how strong the economy will be. You will be feared by people if you have your own currency.
You will be your own superpower.
And everyone who believes or thinks to have his own currency will be fought to death, because that's the red line that you cannot just get close to. And see what happened to Imam Ali when he did the. I mean, I would say, by thinking now in different perspective, I don't want to make it long, all these internal civil wars, the three of them that you just mentioned, I think in certain fashion they could be indirectly motivated by the Byzantine Empire.
Oh, there's definite connections.
Yeah, because Muawiyah, if Sir John is his writer of the or the author of the meeting minutes in Greek and copy to CC to
Yeah.
CC to the empire of Greek, you know.
Yeah.
So they were just seeing everything and watching everything.
Oh, yeah.
And the good point that you mentioned also today, which is, you know, the Byzantine Empire say, hey, we don't want to take any role and we don't want to touch anyone because we would like you not only to fight each other intellectually, but fight each other physically and weaken each other. Because by you weakening each other, we will benefit.
Absolutely.
So that's a beautiful point. Thank you so much. I'd like to reiterate that because, you know, you touched on it beautifully, as I said, this for the third time saying these words because it's so important to mention that these are key things.
It's definitely important, but also I think what's a different important lecture to have, or a series of lectures, or a topic to cover is the Rasulullah's Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his role against the Byzantine Empire,
Oh, awesome.
and their involvement in Medina. Abdullah bin Amr, when غزوة تبوك, Abdullah bin Amr أحد رؤوس النفاق.
Yes.
And what a lot of people don't mention, he was a priest in Najran, and he had direct links to the emperor of Byzantine. And he made Masjid Dirar.
Ahsan.
It's
That's right.
mentioned in the Quran.
That's right.
And the Prophet himself dismantled it and burned it to the ground. And the ayah came down about Masjid Dirar, as we know. So Masjid Dirar was concocted indirectly by the Byzantine Empire. A lot of people think that the Munafiqeen in Medina were just kind of roaming free, and they were like, they had no leadership, they had no direction, that they were just some bad people who just wanted some really bad outcomes for Islam and Muslims and the Prophet at the time. It makes absolutely no sense. Because over time they would have just dissipated. Within a couple of years they would have dissipated in Medina. But you saw that they had their own party. They had a very strong presence, to the point where there was a surah in the Quran dedicated to them, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking about them. The question is, who backed them? And those people didn't operate based on no funding. Who funded them? Who gave them the logistics about Tabuk? But what's also very important to recognize is that there was an intelligence warfare between the Prophet and the Byzantine Empire at the same time. Intelligence and counterintelligence, intelligence and counterintelligence. And that network was nurtured by Amir al-Mu'mineen through the 25 years that he was not allowed at the executive branch. He maintained that intelligence network so that when he stepped in, transition was very smooth. And continued. And the Imam alayhi salam, Imam Hassan alayhi salam, continued that intelligence as well. One example of it is, as soon as the allegiance that was given in Kufa, there were two assassins that were sent. One to Kufa, one to Basra. They weren't supposed to just assassinate. That was the last part of their mission. The first part was to start rumors. The Imam al-Hassan is stepping away. Imam al-Hassan is unsure about war. Imam al-Hassan is this. Imam al-Hassan is too struck with grief. Within, as historical context, within a week of their arrival, they were captured. How? By whom? History doesn't tell us names. The letter that was sent from Imam al-Hassan to Muawiyah, وَقَدْ بَلَغَنِي, that's how he starts. When they don't want to reveal who their sources are and how they got their information, that's how Amir al-Mu'mineen used to start his letters to Muawiyah. وَقَدْ بَلَغَنِي. And to his governors, وَقَدْ بَلَغَنِي. Because he had his own spy network. Salaamullah alayhim. They knew how to run it. They knew how to run it exactly, to the T. But there was an intelligence warfare between the two, consistently. Now some people may say, well, the Byzantine Empire doesn't know who Ali ibn Abi Talib is. I challenge that for the mere fact in the Battle of Mu'tah, who was the first commander to step forward? Ja'far al-Tayyar. But they didn't know him as Ja'far al-Tayyar, they knew him as Ja'far ibn Abu Talib. And the historical books, and this is one of the madlumiyas of Ja'far, his role, not only as a diplomat, but as a military leader. He incurred damage in his first few waves of attacks on the Roman front lines. And they started gathering intelligence about him. Who is this? And what's his name? And where does he come from? And who's his family? They started writing all those things down. And they knew from before. So the intelligence of the counterintelligence that we are not privy to, because we always think, oh, the Prophet and the Imam, they just sit in the masjid and they used to pray and they did dua and they did this and they did that. Their function was way, way more beyond that. Sophisticated, and they beat them to the punch. Tabuk, as you mentioned beautifully, was a setup. It was an absolute setup. The setup was that the Prophet was supposed to march, and everyone was supposed to leave. And the plan was that the Munafiqeen are supposed to find some excuses to fall back from the army, and they did. And the Prophet saw that. He continued the march, then he sent back who? Imam Ali, to replace a governor that we're not going to name, because that governor was known for different allegiances as well. And he replaced them, and there was a dialogue between Amir al-Mu'mineen and the Prophet. And Amir al-Mu'mineen said, you're going to send me back to the women and children. And that's Hadith al-Manzila. أنت مني بمنزلة هارون من موسى. And as soon as he sent him back, the narrations say that Amir al-Mu'mineen gathered everybody in the masjid and gave a khutbah and made it mandatory to attend prayer, so he could keep an eye on them. And by the way, he never cut communication with the Prophet. He was constantly, messengers were going back and forth between Amir al-Mu'mineen and the Prophet. So they flipped the plan. Plan B. Plan B was, okay, if we're not going to take Medina, then we have to assassinate him. Activate the sleeper cells, as we know them in today's, political or whatever you want to call it terms. You activate some sleeper cells. And there's about 10 or 12 of them. And the assassination plan is as soon as he gets to Tabuk, or when they're going around the mountain in the middle of the night, scare his camel so he can fall off the horse or something along those lines. And there was lightning, and the lightning showed their faces, and the Prophet knew who they were, and he told Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman. And there was one of them who used to always come to Hudayfa and tell him, was I one of the names? Was I one of them? And Hudayfa told him, if you are one of the names, why are you asking me? And if you know you're not one of them, also why are you asking me? And this person used to wait for Hudayfa, that anyone who prayed, whenever somebody dies, he used to wait for Hudayfa to go to the prayer first. If Hudayfa went, he would go with him. If Hudayfa did not attend, he knew that person has a problem. Hudayfa is another person who had, he was the secret diary of the Prophet. Hudayfa was. He kept all the secrets that was given to him. That was another companion, Ridwanullahi alayhi. To go back to your point, the Byzantine Empire, no one can convince anyone that a superpower just sits idle. Never, ever has it happened in history, and still does not. Still does not. And it will not. Because there's always motives to want more and to have control. That's just the bottom line. That's how they are. But to say that the Prophet ﷺ and the Imams didn't have anything, it's wrong. I would say not. As a matter of fact, I'll take it a step further, is that when Muslim bin Aqil stepped into Kufa, he activated his network. There was the recruitment, everything that was more peripheral. He bought neighborhoods, he started training centers, there's a lot of things that happened as well. Salli ala Muhammad. So sorry, I don't wanna. I could sit here and talk all night about about this stuff because the historical stuff behind it is, as you mentioned, Abu Ahmed, is rarely talked about, unfortunately. So inshallah, this is something that we can delve into.